Before you make your first game, stop and watch this video until the end because there are some things that you need to know. I can obviously only speak from my own experience and from what I've heard from other devs, but whether or not you're working on a small game or a large game, there is a very good chance that at some point during development, you are going to hate your game. You are absolutely and completely going to feel like you hate your game. And this is a really important step in your development process because it can be really easy to quit your project when you reach this stage. And what I'd say is this: try to view this from an objective point of view, which is hard to do, but if you're struggling with it, something that can help is writing down why you feel like you hate your game. Because you might feel like you hate your game for a valid reason and maybe something about the design needs to change. If that's the case, then that is a crucial piece of information that you need to know as early as possible. Or on the other hand, you might feel like you hate it just because it feels a little bit stale, or because of all the bugs, or because you find it a little bit boring because you've playtested it 1,000 times. There's only so many times I can playtest my own game and see bug after bug after bug, and not just want to throw my hands up and be like, this game is a piece of shit. So that's really understandable, but bugs can be fixed. I often have a really long list of known bugs that I keep track of, and I'll continue working on other things for a little while until eventually I switch into bug squashing mode where I'll tackle a lot of those all at once. Because sometimes hunting down every little bug that you find every time you find one can actually be a much less effective way to work, especially if at that time what you're focused on is making more content for your game. So in that scenario, in terms of how you're feeling, bugs really shouldn't matter. At least not when you view your game as a whole, because bugs are just temporary, because you will end up fixing them. So just keep that in mind. This feeling is very likely going to pop up, and if it does, use it to just see if something in your game actually needs to be changed, or are you just maybe a little bit too close to it and you can't see the forest for the trees. So if you are like me and you have not been in this industry for decades and decades and decades, then chances are the further into development you get, the more it's going to feel like your game is just slapped together with tape and glue. And like the smallest little problem is going to make it all come crumbling apart. And I do feel that it's really important for everyone watching right now that other devs do experience this feeling as well. If you feel like you're the only one with this issue, then you might end up second guessing yourself a lot of the time, and that's not good. So just know you're not the only one. That's the first thing. And despite your best attempt to follow all the best coding practices and the best design practices and all of that stuff, it still feels like one little thing can break your entire game. And I do think that a lot of this boils down to perspective. And what I mean is, how many unpolished pre-alpha versions of games have you actually played besides your own, right? Like usually when you play a game, the bugs are kept to a minimum, everything's polished, everything works the way it's supposed to, but this will not be the case when you're working on your game, at least not for 99.9% of the development process. It's like reading a book before it's been edited and then comparing that book to other bestsellers out there. It just doesn't make sense. So keep that in mind. It is normal, but I do believe that the longer you do this, the more experience that you gather and the more you learn about all the best practices and coding principles, these things will help negate some of this for you, because all of those things exist to help you build the most stable and modular game as possible. This last one is not to depress you, it's just a fact. If you are a game developer, then you are an artist. And art and how good the art is subject to people and all of their personal preferences. Obviously, you want to do your best to make the best game possible. If you find your game fun, then other people will too. But Hollow Knight, one of my favorite games of all time, still has some really crappy reviews out there. I've seen comments calling it a walking simulator, which I disagree with. But the point is, everyone will view your game differently. Not everyone will like it. And that's why when it comes to gathering feedback on your game, it's really important to know, is this person in my target market? And do they even like this genre? Then you can actually gather enough data to know where you stand. Meaning, get feedback from multiple sources. Feedback from like 1 or 2 people doesn't mean a whole lot, but if 20 different people are criticizing the same thing in your game, then there's probably something wrong there. If it's just 1 or 2, then it might just be a preference difference. Hollow Knight is a hard game. Some people just don't enjoy really difficult games. Not everyone enjoys exploring really huge worlds and trying to figure out where in the hell you're supposed to go next. Not everyone likes 2D games. Apparently contact damage frustrates some people as well. You get it though. Some design decisions that you make, decisions that are core to what your game is, some of that will frustrate some people. That's okay though. If you were a AAA developer, you'd be trying to smooth out every rough edge and make everything about the game as enjoyable for as many people as possible. When you're an indie developer, you can make games that speak a whole lot more to a smaller audience. And that is a good thing, not a bad thing. That smaller audience will remember and love your game. Silksong, the very highly anticipated sequel to Silksong, was announced with a full-blown trailer and private demo way back in 2019. And it's, as of right now, the #2 most wishlisted game on Steam. Still, 4 years later. They've released so little news about that game, and yet it will still break the internet when it launches. So sometimes when you make a game that's not necessarily for everyone, you will end up with a crowd of people that really, really love it. And just for those who are just getting started, what advice would you give them? What things would you want them to know? Let us know down below in the comments. I want to give a very special thank you to all of our Hall of Fame patrons, Jakob Yondok, Sandra Kessler, Darren Preen, Throbbing Wind, Fontaine Waite, Couch, Christopher Nichols, and Brainwaves to Binary, as well as our early access patrons, Zyoma, Ken Waite, Mason Crow, Mr. D, Audio Games, Jan, Donnie Briggs, Alexander Prestis, Darren Cook, Godsworn, Abdulaziz, Hamad Alanazi, Bill Guo, Alone on Mars, Code Jutsu, Merler, Ayush Sharma, and Jarrett Whitehead. If you choose to support us on Patreon, you can get access to all of our YouTube videos, monthly alpha builds, and more.